the actual results of our work out here. So as many of you know, in 2007, New York opened up spring fishing, catch and immediate release for bass. Prior to that, we were one of a handful of states that did not allow spring fishing for bass, because there was only 4 or 5 that did that, and Pennsylvania had liberalized their regulations. The local bass clubs in New York were starting to feel kind of left out. They said, well, what about us? How come we can't spring fish like everybody else can? And the agency wanted to respond to that. Ideally, before you make a major reg change like that, you do some science and then you decide whether or not the reg change is worthwhile. And before I arrived at Cornell, they started that process and had Mark Olson, who was my predecessor, do a statistical power analysis to see how many years of research it would take to find out whether or not it was safe to open bass for spring fishing. And what he found was it would take a good long time. And when you went back to the bass folks and an unusual lack of patience with management decisions, they said they preferred faster action than 20 years. So we were left with the pressure to change the regulation, and an issue we didn't know that much about, because most states allowed spring fishing forever, so you didn't have a whole lot of data to look at. A little bit of speculation, and I think Dick Rumsfeld kind of summarizes the situation pretty well. There's stuff we knew, stuff we didn't know, stuff we didn't know, and stuff we thought we knew that we didn't actually know. And what wound up happening was we did kind of a weight of evidence study. We looked at all kinds of different data, particularly on Idle Lake, and tried to make an argument whether or not it looked like spring fishing would hurt. And in painful detail, I presented this process to folks in Lake Placid, and I'll spare you that this time because I have data to share. Closed spring seasons are based primarily or almost entirely on 2 premises. One, that males who are guarding the nest are highly vulnerable to angling, and once you remove a male from a nest, the survival of eggs and fry goes down, thereby reducing your class production. There have been a handful of studies addressing this kind of thing, the vulnerability. Dave's folks in Illinois went out and said, yeah, you can catch the crap out of bass when they're on the nest. Folks in Nevada said, no, you really can't. So that was not necessarily definitive on that, but it looks like some places you can, some places you can't. Couldn't make a decision based on that. If you do remove a guardian male from a nest, there's no question that it reduces survival of eggs and fry, because there are predators out there, including our native species like bluegill, pumpkin seed, and yellow perch, who are more than happy to go in there and feast on eggs and fry in the absence of a guardian male. The severity of the loss of that nest is based largely on how long the fish is off the nest. If you remove a fish and keep it off, you lose almost all your nest. If you release it pretty quickly, they'll get back on the nest and guard it. If you play with them and wear them out, then you lose a fair number. So that relationship's there, but the nature of the fishery has a lot to do with how serious it is. But the big question as fish managers is not what are we doing to an individual nest, but what are we doing to the bass population. Our primary interest is sustainability of the fishery, not simply for one nest. So the question is not will we hurt this nest, but will we hurt enough nests to actually impact recruitment, near class development, and ultimately the sustainability of the fishery. There are 2 schools of thought on this. One is that recruitment is simply a numbers game. The other is more of a lottery. The numbers game, a bunch of bass, they make a bunch of nests, they all make eggs, they make fry. Every nest has a good potential to contribute to the year class. So the impact of spring fishing has to do with the magnitude of the fishery impact. How many nests you ultimately hurt by removing fish from it. And as a percentage of the population that you harvest off nests, the odds that you're going to hurt the year class go up. The other one, which seems to be the prevailing school of thought now, is it's not a numbers game, it's more of a lottery. Not all nests are created equal. Some nests are particularly well positioned to produce a good year class because they have very effective males, or the males attract good females, but not all nests contribute. There's just a subset that does. This thinking based primarily on a study from Minnesota and a small lake in Canada, I believe it was. It showed that most of the year class came from a very small subset of the nest. And this, to my knowledge, this study hasn't been reproduced, but this is pretty much a school of thought that some nests are better than others. So therefore, when you're fishing, the question is not how many nests do you impact, but whether or not you accidentally impact the wrong ones. And this is the work that Dave Phillip and his crew does. That you have males who are particularly aggressive guarders. They're the most likely to produce successful nests. They're also the most likely to be captured by angling because they're aggressively guarding, they'll attack lures aggressively. And so you're essentially doing fisheries-induced evolution by removing the best guardian males in the population through fishing, and therefore ultimately destroy your year classes in your population. So if that's true, then we have to revisit what is it that's important for determining your class of bass. We have these life stages that are fairly distinct. If you think your class is most dependent on the parent stock and the number of eggs produced, this implies a pretty specific stock recruitment relationship. If what you think is that your class is based on how many of those nests are successful, this is where Dave's coming from. There's something of a stock recruitment relationship, but also which males are the best relationship. And then the other school of thought on bass year class development is that it's not the number of young that are produced, it's the conditions in the summer. Ecologically, do the fish transition from zooplankton to insects to fish quickly enough to reach a size that allows them to survive through the wintertime? So if we understood what the key period was for year class development in bass, we'd know whether or not spring fishing had potential to be injurious. But as scientists are prone to do, we can get a vote for almost any school of thought. There are people who think that stock recruitment is important. They're a minority. A lot of folks think that it's that early production, the number of eggs and juveniles that they get past that guardian stage, and a fair number of folks who think that doesn't matter. What matters is that first year growth and winter survival. So because of the reg change, we had a chance to play this game in New York. In 2007, the season that had been historically closed from ice out to the third Saturday of June was opened up to catch and immediate release fishing. And then we could actually do some science stuff. We opened the fishery, and now we can evaluate that because we're, 12 years down the line, and we can look at what happened. We had 3 lakes at least that had good long-term data sets to allow us to do a before and after type study. Oneida Lake that we've been studying for 153 centuries. Canandaigua Lake, which Dave Green studied with great detail for quite a few years, and Lake Erie, where Don Einhouse was generous enough to share his data as part of this analysis. So we'll start with Canandaigua, the smaller lake at the top of the Susquehanna drainage. Has both largemouth and smallmouth bass, nest predators, yellow perch, beluga, Poughkeepsie, the normal thing. Zebra mussels invaded the lake in 2002. They followed the traditional statewide pattern closed fishery through 2007 to the catch and immediate release fishery from December 1st through the traditional season. Shoreline electric fishing sampling annually since 1990 at 3.1 kilometer fixed site where they collected both species. And here's the catches that they got. You can see this is a lake that probably because of the zebra mussel invasion had been transitioning from smallmouth to largemouth for some time. Largemouth now the dominant bass. So we'll start with the smallmouth. Closed season actually produced a higher mean than after the season opened, but not significant. Largemouth the other way around. Again, not a significant change, but a higher mean for the largemouth, or after the spring fishing was opened. We'll go to Don's work at Lake Erie, which is a beautifully long data set. This is big water. Again, the native predators, ground goby invaded the lake in 1998, so another factor. People are concerned that gobies are an extra complication of this relationship that might make spring fishing a particularly bad idea. Zebra mussels in the late 80s, quagga mussels replacing them in the 90s. They do a H2 and H3 gillnet survey. We use the H2 index, and their data goes back to 1979. So this far exceeds Olson's recipe for how long is long enough to think you know anything. They follow a slightly different pattern. They allowed spring fishing well in advance of the statewide change in 1994. They allowed a season that allowed folks to keep 1 fish, and then in 2007 they increased the minimum on that. This is particularly important to note that you were removing fish from the nest entirely. The catch immediate release is a very conservative approach. This actually allows people to keep a male. So if there was going to be an impact, this is a scenario that it's particularly likely in. The other variable, one reason we might not see a response is because nobody cared that the regulations changed. If we had a closed fishery, then we opened it, but nobody did it. We know in Lake Erie that the effort more than doubled, so we know people are taking advantage of that opportunity, so we don't think there's any reason to think that there would be no impact because there was no response to the regulation change. And there's Don's data, and there's the statistics. This is one of only 2, I think, of the comparisons that was significant, and it says there were significantly bigger year classes produced after spring fishing opened. This is, of course, contrary to the idea that spring fishing destroys year class development because we had bigger year classes after spring fishing was liberalized. And finally, we come to Oneida. Again, both species of bass. We got mussels, we got gobies very late in this data set, so they're probably not a factor. Native predators, the two parkies and the yellow perch. Here we had a slightly abnormal development. We opened the season In 2007, like everybody else, but our lake association is walleye fishermen. They argued successfully for a while that once you open the bass season, then every person in Utica had a bass boat that they were going to bring to the lake, pretending to be spring bass fishermen, and catch all our spawning walleye. So for several years, the bass catch release season did not open until the opening day of walleye season in 2013. That stopped and then followed the statewide regs. So as of 2013, fishing for bass was available from ice out through the traditional season. Unusual index, our best smallmouth index is a summer trawl survey where we catch smallmouth, and it's proven to be a decent index. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But we also do seining, not every year, so this is not a continuous data set, but we have several years of that, so I'll look at both approaches there. We also have indications that we had a response to that. Our May effort went up by about 30% after the spring season for bass opened up, about a quarter of that for bass. An ongoing creel survey asked our fishermen whether they utilized the lake, the spring fishing opportunity, and about 20% normally say yes. That's roughly the percentage of bass anglers that use the lake. So we know most of our bass fishermen are in fact taking advantage of spring fishing opportunities. So a response will not be driven by lack of effort. We know folks are using the lake. And there's our trawl data, and there's the stats there. Larger year classes on average after the season opened than before. Almost significant, 0.06. I guess I teased Dave Phillip in Lake Class and said since he's convinced me that the classes go down, we could probably go about the one-tailed t-test, which means 0.06, of course, would be significant. And Dave chuckled at that, but there you go. No signs that the year class went down. Then we have the seine data. So we had July seines and August seines in enough years to make it worth doing the stats. Again, same results, non-significant differences, but in both cases, we had bigger year classes after the spring season fishing started than before. And in case you're curious on the stats, I go back and forth. Sometimes log transformation normalize the data, in which case I did a t-test just like you learn in freshman stats and never actually get to use in real life in fisheries. Sometimes that didn't happen, so we did non-parametrics on the raw data. In this case, these are non-parametrics. In August, same year, so these should follow the same pattern we had for smallmouth. We had bigger year classes, but not significantly so. After the season opened in largemouth, we had slightly smaller year classes after the season opened, but again, not significant. So my take-home message from that is, despite some of the predictions that Dave and his folks would make, is there was absolutely no impact, no negative impact of opening the spring season on bass year class production in the lakes that we have data from in New York. It just appeared to make no difference. In most cases, the means were higher. Only in a few cases were they significantly higher. In one case, in that case, it was actually bigger year classes after the spring fishing opened. None of which, with my modest intellect, would I interpret as saying that spring fishing was hurting bass recruitment. Now, when Dave was there, I was arguing that spring fishing actually promoted bigger year class production because that irritated him. And Dave and our friends, don't get me wrong. But there's a little bit back and forth that goes on. But we know that's probably not true. There's no mechanism by which fishing for bass in spring would produce bigger year classes. I think what's going on, bass are responding positively to climate change. All kinds of studies show bigger year classes come from warmer summers. We have more warmer summers now than we used to have. So that's probably what's going on. Zebra mussels create conditions that are better for bass. So we have environmental conditions that are way offsetting any potential negative impacts to the angler. We're not saying there are negative impacts, but whatever else is going on that is good for bass is way more important in terms of what's going on recently than the spring fishing is. And I thought just because we had it, and we had the question about when is your class strength set, that I'd look at this. So these are relationships between our young of year indices and the gillnet catch at age 4 or 5 of smallmouth bass we may recruit in the fishery. And I was pretty shocked that the one year that people actually called BS on when I presented this down south, that nobody believed that the trawl index, the bottom trawl is in habitat where the bass aren't. And they said that's a nonsense index, but it turns out to be a highly significant relationship with it, not too awful. Our square given things go, that it does look like the abundance of juveniles before that first winter is highly related to the number of fish that recruit in the fishery. Similar relationships, but not significantly the same, probably impaired a little bit by sample size, or those just aren't as good a gear, which also makes no sense. Seine is a traditional bass gear. You'd think if there was going to be one that was predictive, it would be that, and not a trawl out in the middle of the lake, but that's not the way that it turned out. But that's something we'll continue to look at. It's consistent with what I saw in North Carolina. We thought your class strength was set right after schools broke up, and that R square was like 0.9 or something. So I'm kind of a fan of that earlier class strength establishment and not the ecology of the winter stuff. And that is all the data we have. I did not push you 2 minutes, I almost pushed you. So if there's time for questions, I'll take one or two.